to foil by accidentally making a huge mess of my best friend's wedding. It was the morning of my best friend's wedding, and I was feeling a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Emma and I had known each other since we were kids, and I had the honor of being her maid of honor. I had spent months helping her plan everything, from choosing the perfect venue to picking the right flowers. But what was supposed to be a beautiful and memorable day would quickly become a disaster, all because of my inability to keep my cool in a stressful situation. The day started off perfectly fine. I woke up early, put on the pale pink dress Emma had chosen for me, and got my hair done. Everything was looking good. I had even managed to get there early enough to help with any last-minute details. Emma's family was buzzing around the bridal suite, and I could feel the tension in the air. Everyone was both excited and overwhelmed. It was a lot to manage, but we were doing fine. Around 10 a.m., the bridal party had gathered in the suite. Emma was getting her makeup done while I took on the unofficial role of gopher, running around, making sure everything was in place. We were supposed to have the ceremony at 1 p.m., and everything was running on schedule. That is, until the moment I opened the door to the hotel storage room. Let me explain a bit. Emma had spent weeks making sure all the decor was perfect. The flowers were arranged with incredible care. The seating chart had been meticulously planned, and the ceremony would be held in a gorgeous garden. The only problem was that we had to transport a lot of things from the hotel storage area to the ceremony space, and things were getting last minute. So, I've been asked to grab the wedding favors, little boxes with personalized chocolates for the guests. I had seen them earlier, and they looked simple but elegant. Just little boxes wrapped in gold ribbon with the couple's names on them. I rushed to the storage room to grab them, but as soon as I opened the door, I realized that I was looking at more than just wedding favors. There was a massive pile of things stacked in that room. Extra chairs, the flower arrangement for the aisle, some bags of snacks for the bridal party, and, of course, the wedding favors. However, I couldn't see the wedding favors right away because they were buried under a mountain of other stuff. I started shifting things around in the room, trying to find the boxes, but it was like playing Tetris. Everything kept falling. Now, I should mention that I'm a naturally clumsy person, and I was already starting to feel the pressure of the day's events. My heart was racing, and I had no idea how much time I had left to get these favors. As I moved some boxes around, a stack of flower arrangements toppled over, followed by a large bag of snacks. In a split second, I lost my balance and knocked over a chair, which in turn caused a stack of chairs to collapse. The noise was deafening. I froze, horrified by the mess I had just made. I had no idea what to do. My first instinct was to try to clean it up quickly before anyone noticed, but the room was filled with so much stuff, I wasn't sure where to even begin. I quickly realized that if I didn't fix this soon, someone would come in and see the chaos I had caused. In a panic, I grabbed the bags of wedding favors I had been looking for and shoved them into my arms, hoping no one would notice that I had made the situation worse. I turned to leave the storage room, but as I tried to exit, I bumped into a table and knocked a large vase off it. It crashed to the ground, shattering into 1,000 pieces. I swear time slowed down for a moment as I stood there, staring at the shards of glass scattered on the floor. I was in full-blown panic mode now, trying to keep it together, but knowing full well that I had just made everything so much worse. I scrambled to pick up the broken glass, but the more I tried to clean it up, the more I seemed to make things worse. The wedding favors were now covered in glitter from the broken vase, and the boxes were slightly crushed from the chaos of it all. The sound of footsteps coming down the hallway snapped me back to reality. Emma's mom, who was always a little tense, appeared at the door. She took one look at me, surrounded by broken glass, crushed wedding favors, and a mess of decorations, and her face turned pale. "What happened?" she asked, her voice tight. I tried to explain, but nothing I said made it sound any better. I had caused a disaster. I apologized over and over, but Emma's mom just shook her head, muttering under her breath. She turned and stormed out of the room, and I was left standing there in complete shock. I had no idea how to fix this. I was about to ruin the biggest day of Emma's life, and I couldn't even tell her. I knew if I confessed to her that I'd made a mess of everything, she would be devastated. I couldn't bring myself to ruin her day. Desperate, I frantically started cleaning up the broken glass and fixing the wedding favors. But with every step I took, it felt like things were slipping further out of control. The favors were no longer presentable, and I was sure that Emma would notice that the flowers and decorations were not as they should be. I tried to reassemble everything in a way that looked like I had it all under control, but I was sure it was obvious I hadn't. Finally, I decided that I needed to go get help. I ran to the front desk and begged them to send someone to fix the mess I had made. The staff responded quickly, but by the time they arrived, it was already too late. The wedding ceremony was about to start, and there was no way to fix everything in time. Emma had already started getting ready for the walk down the aisle. I took a deep breath, dreading the moment when I would have to tell Emma what happened. I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. When I finally pulled her aside, she looked at me, confused and a little concerned. "Is everything okay?" she asked. I couldn't keep it in anymore. I broke down, telling her everything. I explained how I had caused a mess, broken glass, and ruined the favors, all while trying to make sure everything was perfect. Emma stared at me, then broke into a laugh. "You were kidding, right?" she asked between chuckles. "I was so stressed out about everything. And you're worried about that? Do you know how much more of a mess we were going to have if we didn't fix the guest list last night? It's nothing. Don't worry about it." I was stunned. I had been so convinced I had ruined everything. But in reality, Emma was completely chill about the whole situation. We laughed about it for a few minutes, and I felt the weight of the day lift off my shoulders. The wedding went off without a hitch. The ceremony was beautiful, and even though things didn't go exactly as planned, it ended up being a day that I will never forget. And I learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes things go wrong, but as long as you're there for the people you love, it all works out in the end. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by accidentally sending a nude picture to my boss. So, this happened a few months ago, and I'm still recovering from the embarrassment. I'm a 28-year-old woman, and I've worked at my company for the past 3 years. I've been pretty good at keeping things professional, maintaining a level of distance, and avoiding personal drama. My boss, let's call him Mark, is in his early 40s, has been with the company for 10 plus years, and is usually a pretty chill guy, but also has a tendency to make awkward offhand comments now and then. I had just gotten a new phone after mine had been acting up, and I was still in the process of transferring all my contacts, pictures, and settings over. You know, the typical mess of organizing everything. One night, I had been chatting with a friend who, for lack of a better term, had been encouraging me to send some more intimate pictures to spice up the conversation. I'm no stranger to sending a pic or two every now and then, so I decided to send a somewhat risque selfie in a private chat. Everything was fine and dandy, at least until I got distracted and did the one thing that no one should ever do. I had received an email from Mark earlier that day, asking for a report update on a project I had been working on. It wasn't anything urgent, but he wanted it done by the end of the day. I had been putting it off because I was feeling lazy. That evening, I finally sat down to work on the report, but I had been chatting with my friend and texting a bit, so my mind wasn't exactly in the right place. I finished the report, proofread it, and attached it to an email. However, when I was about to hit send, I remembered that I had a new picture from my phone that I wanted to share with my friend, something that seemed playful and fun at the time. Now, here's where things started to go south. In my half-distracted state, I opened the wrong chat and attached the picture to the email I had written from Mark. And to make matters worse, my friend had just sent me a message saying that pic was fire, 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 followed by a thumbs up emoji. So, in my mind, I was still thinking about the conversation with my friend when I hit send. I sat there for a moment, staring at my screen, feeling a bit of relief that I had finally sent the report. But the relief quickly evaporated when I heard the familiar ping of an incoming email. I opened it, expecting it to be a confirmation or perhaps an auto-reply, but instead, it was from Mark. It said, "What's this?" My heart dropped into my stomach. I clicked on the email, and there it was, my nude picture. It was the same one I had just sent to my friend, clearly not meant for professional eyes. I was frozen. I couldn't think. My mind was racing. I quickly scrolled through the email chain and saw that, indeed, I had attached the photo to the email meant for Mark. There was no mistaking it. I had just sent a picture of myself in a very compromising position to my boss. I looked at the clock, 11:45 p.m. It was too late to fix this. It was too late to undo the damage. I panicked. What do I do now? Should I just leave it and hope he didn't open it? Should I explain myself? Should I lie and say it was an accident? None of those options seemed good. And, honestly, I couldn't even figure out which option was the least disastrous. But then I heard another ping. I was hoping that it was some kind of accidental reply, or maybe a new email from a different person. But no, this time, it was a message from Mark. I'm assuming this wasn't meant for me, but it was an interesting surprise. Just letting you know, I got the report. Let me know if you need anything else. My heart sank again. He knew. He knew. After about 10 minutes of hyperventilating and wondering whether or not I should just quit my job, I decided that there was only one thing I could do. I took a deep breath and decided to respond. I kept it short, professional, and as composed as I could. Hi, Mark. I apologize for the mistake. That was absolutely not meant for you. It was intended for a private conversation with a friend. I understand how this may have come off, and I want to assure you that it won't happen again. I'll make sure to double-check everything in the future. The waiting game began. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept running through every possible outcome. Maybe he was just trying to cover up his own embarrassment. Maybe I was being too paranoid. Maybe I was just fired, and I hadn't gotten the memo yet. Then, about 30 minutes later, Mark replied. He said, "It's fine, no big deal. Thanks for letting me know. Just don't send anything like that again. We're all adults here, but we also work together. I don't want things to be weird between us." I felt both relief and horror in equal measure. On the one hand, I had avoided being fired. On the other hand, it was clear that things were going to be awkward from here on out. Every time I saw Mark in the office, I couldn't help but remember that email. I also couldn't help but notice that he'd occasionally give me a very strange look, almost as if he was trying to make sure I wasn't about to send him anything else. The next few days at work felt surreal. I kept thinking that every conversation we had was tainted by that moment. I would ask a simple question about a project, and then wonder if Mark was remembering my picture at the same time. My coworkers, oblivious to what had happened, continued to act like nothing was wrong. But I knew what had transpired. I had made the mistake of letting my personal life bleed into my professional one in a way that I could never take back. The worst part, Mark still works here, and he still gives me those strange, sideways glances whenever we have to interact. I've learned my lesson the hard way. Never, ever, under any circumstances, mix business with anything personal on your phone. It's one of those mistakes you only make once. Or at least I hope. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a thoughtful gesture, only to end up accidentally humiliating myself in front of the entire school. I've always been that guy who's a bit socially awkward. I'm not terrible at making friends, but I'm also not the guy who gets invited to parties or has people hanging out at my house. I've always been a bit of a loner, but I guess it didn't bother me much until this year. That's when I met Mia. Mia is one of the most popular girls in school, and for some reason, she noticed me. I'm not exactly sure what it was about me that caught her eye. Maybe she liked how shy I am. Maybe she felt sorry for me. I honestly have no idea. But whatever it was, it led to a couple of friendly conversations between us. And over time, I started to develop a massive crush on her. I tried to play it cool, but as time went on, I began to really like her. The thing is, I'm so socially awkward that it felt like there was no way in hell she'd ever be into me. I mean, I didn't even know how to flirt. I was just a guy who nervously talked about video games and sports when I was around her. So, like any rational person, I decided I needed to make a bold move. I wasn't about to just let her slip away without trying something. I had to do something big, something that would make her see me in a new light. But what? That's when I remembered a conversation we'd had a few days earlier, where she casually mentioned how much she loved coffee. Not just any coffee, but coffee from this very specific, high-end coffee shop in town. I thought, this is it. This is my chance. I'd heard that one of the best ways to impress someone was to do something thoughtful for them, something that shows you're paying attention. So, I decided I'd surprise her the next morning with a coffee from her favorite place. It sounded simple enough. How could anyone not appreciate that? I figured I'd just go in, grab a coffee, and casually hand it to her between classes. She'd think it was sweet, and I'd look like the coolest guy on the planet. I'd get the chance to chat with her, maybe even get to know her better. The problem? I had no idea how to actually execute this plan. The night before, I got everything ready. I checked the opening hours for the coffee shop. They opened at 6 a.m., and I set my alarm for 5:30 so I could make sure I got there early enough to get the order just right. I even went so far as to Google how to order a fancy coffee, because I didn't want to look like an idiot when I showed up. I settled on a caramel macchiato because Mia had mentioned that she liked sweet drinks, and it seemed like the kind of thing she'd go for. The next morning, I was up before the sun, jittery with excitement and nervousness. I threw on my clothes, grabbed my wallet, and hurried out the door. I felt like a spy on a mission. I didn't even care that I hadn't had breakfast yet. All that mattered was getting that coffee. I arrived at the coffee shop just as it opened. There was no line, which was great. The barista looked at me like I was a deer in the headlights when I asked for a caramel macchiato. I tried to hide my nerves by smiling and acting casual, but I probably looked like a man on the verge of a breakdown. The barista took my order, and I waited, trying not to think too hard about how much I might be screwing this up. Finally, the barista handed me the cup. It was a little more complicated than I'd imagined. There was some weird foam art on top of the drink, which I didn't know what to do with. I tried to play it off like I was totally used to this kind of thing, but in reality, I was already overthinking everything. Okay, this is fine. This is fine. I'm not going to screw this up, I whispered to myself, trying to keep it together. I left the coffee shop, clutching the drink like it was the Holy Grail. My heart was racing, and I could already imagine the look on Mia's face when I handed her the drink. She'd probably laugh, call me cute, and maybe, just maybe, this would be the start of something special. But then came the hard part. I had to figure out when to give it to her. I didn't want to just walk up to her in the middle of class. That would be awkward and disruptive. I figured I'd catch her between periods when she'd be more relaxed. But as luck would have it, I ran into her as I was walking to class. She was with her friends, laughing and chatting. I tried to act casual, but my hands were sweating and I was so nervous I thought my legs might give out. I walked up to her and smiled like I was completely fine. "Hey, Mia," I said, trying to sound calm, but my voice cracked like a 12-year-old's. She looked at me with a pleasant smile. "Hey, what's up?" I got you something," I said, handing her the cup with a flourish, hoping to look like I had it all together. "I remember you said you liked coffee from that place, so I thought I'd get you one." Her eyes widened for a second, and then she smiled, looking genuinely surprised. My heart skipped a beat. Maybe this wasn't such a disaster after all. But then she took the cup from me, peered at it, and said, "Wait, you got me a caramel macchiato." I nodded eagerly. "Yeah, I remember you said you liked it." Her smile faltered for a split second. She looked down at the cup again, then back up at me. I don't actually drink coffee," she said, her voice awkward. My face turned beet red, and the moment felt like it lasted forever. "Wait, what?" "Yeah," she continued, now clearly trying to make it less awkward. "I said I like coffee shop vibes and the idea of coffee, but I don't actually drink it. It gives me terrible stomach cramps." There was a beat of silence as I stood there, completely frozen. Her friends started laughing, but it wasn't like they were laughing with me. I could tell they were laughing at me. Mia's face was turning a bit red too, and I could see how uncomfortable she was. I tried to save face. "Oh, I guess I didn't think about that," I stammered, feeling like the biggest idiot in the world. She smiled awkwardly, taking a step back. "It's really sweet of you to think of me, though." "Thanks, I guess." I managed to choke out a half-hearted, "No problem," before I turned and bolted toward the nearest exit. I didn't even care that I had a full day of school ahead of me. I just needed to get away from that moment. I'm pretty sure I spent the rest of the day avoiding any place I might run into her again. Long story short, I learned that trying too hard to impress someone can backfire, especially when you completely misread what they actually like. I still feel embarrassed thinking about it, but I guess it's a lesson learned. And now I'm sticking to video games and awkward small talk, where I'm much more comfortable. TIFU by trying to surprise my girlfriend with a romantic dinner and accidentally giving her food poisoning. So, for context, my girlfriend, let's call her Emily, and I have been dating for about a year now. We're both in our mid-20s, and I've always tried to be the romantic type when it comes to our relationship, planning little surprises here and there, trying to keep the spark alive. Emily's always appreciated the effort, and I figured a homemade romantic dinner would be the perfect gesture for our anniversary. We live in a small apartment, and while I'm no chef, I do know my way around the kitchen enough to whip up something edible. I wasn't aiming for Michelin star cuisine, but I wanted it to be special. I spent the entire day preparing for this dinner. I even made a list of all the ingredients I would need: fresh herbs, fancy steak cuts, a rich cream sauce, and of course, dessert. I went shopping and spent way more money than I should have on premium ingredients because I wanted everything to be perfect. The plan was for Emily to come home from work, and the apartment would be filled with the mouth-watering aroma of a meal she wouldn't forget. I decided on a 3-course meal: a light appetizer of bruschetta, a main course of seared steak with a side of mashed potatoes and asparagus, and for dessert, a homemade chocolate mousse. Everything seemed perfect. I mean, how could a steak go wrong, right? I thought I'd nailed the recipe. I even set the table with candles, played some soft music, and had a bottle of her favorite red wine ready to go. It was going to be an unforgettable night. Emily got home from work a little later than expected. I greeted her at the door with a big grin on my face, and, of course, my attempt at looking like the perfect boyfriend. She was immediately hit with the smell of dinner cooking, and her eyes lit up. I was feeling proud. I felt like a top-tier boyfriend, and she looked genuinely excited about the surprise. We sat down to eat, and honestly, things started off really well. The bruschetta was crunchy and flavorful, and the wine was flowing smoothly. We talked about our day, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. Then came the main course. I had spent a lot of time searing the steaks, making sure they were perfectly cooked on the outside, while keeping the inside tender and juicy. I added the cream sauce and set everything up with the mashed potatoes and asparagus. Just like the recipe said, it all looked picture perfect. Emily took her first bite, smiled, and told me it was amazing. I felt like a total boss. But then, maybe 10 minutes later, things started to take a turn. Emily went quiet. She took another bite of the steak, but then put her fork down. I didn't think much of it at first, because she's not the biggest eater and sometimes gets full quickly. But then her face changed. Her smile faded, and she started to look uncomfortable. She took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry, but I don't feel so good." I immediately panicked. "What? Are you okay?" She nodded, but didn't look okay at all. I think I might have eaten too much too fast. I stood up, completely rattled, and offered to get her some water. She took a sip, but then excused herself to the bathroom. At this point, my heart was racing. I sat down and started nervously poking at my own steak, wondering if I had done something wrong. Maybe I had undercooked it? Did I use a weird seasoning? My mind was running through all the possible mistakes I could have made. But she seemed okay enough when she came back. She sat down at the table again, but wasn't touching her food. "I think I'm going to lie down for a bit," she said quietly. I tried to play it off, thinking it was just a fluke. "Hey, maybe you're just tired from work. You've been doing a lot recently." She agreed, and I helped her get comfortable on the couch. I wasn't convinced, but I didn't want to make her feel worse by pushing the issue. I sat next to her, trying to keep the atmosphere light, but after about 10 minutes, things escalated rapidly. Emily bolted up from the couch and ran to the bathroom. I could hear her getting sick. I immediately jumped up and rushed to her side, feeling like the world was crashing down around me. "Emily, are you okay?" I called through the door. She didn't answer at first, but I heard her voice weakly say, I think it was the food." My heart sank. I've been so proud of that meal, so sure that everything was perfect, and now she was in pain. I knocked on the door, and she opened it just a crack. Her face was pale, and she looked absolutely miserable. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I think I got food poisoning or something. That steak, it didn't taste right. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I was responsible for this. The entire dinner was ruined, and now I had to figure out how to fix it." I apologized 100 times, feeling helpless. Emily kept reassuring me that it wasn't my fault, but I couldn't shake the guilt. I spent the next hour pacing around the apartment, Googling food poisoning symptoms and trying to find out what went wrong. It didn't take long to realize that the culprit was likely the steak. I had purchased it from a local butcher that had been recommended to me as having premium cuts. It was a bit more expensive than what I usually buy, so I thought it would be perfect for this special occasion. But now I was wondering if it had been undercooked or had somehow gone bad. The thought of poisoning Emily with my romantic gesture made me want to crawl into a hole and never come out. Eventually, Emily managed to get some rest, and I cleaned up the mess in the kitchen, throwing away all the food. I went to bed too, but sleep didn't come easily. I kept replaying the evening in my mind, cringing at how everything had spiraled from perfect romantic dinner to food poisoning nightmare. The next morning, Emily felt a bit better. She was still a little queasy, but thankfully, she had stopped vomiting. She even managed a weak smile when I apologized once again. "It's okay," she said, patting my arm. "I'm just glad you tried." But I still felt like a total failure. I had wanted to show her how much I care, and instead, I ended up making her sick. Needless to say, I don't think I'll be cooking her dinner for quite some time. In fact, we ended up going out to a restaurant for our rescheduled anniversary celebration, where I made sure to order something safe and foolproof. To anyone thinking about cooking a fancy meal for a special occasion, my advice: maybe stick to something you're absolutely sure you can make without potentially poisoning someone. Because nothing says, "I love you," like a 5-star food poisoning experience. TLDR, tried to surprise my girlfriend with a romantic homemade dinner for our anniversary. Gave her food poisoning instead. TIFU by bringing my mom to my job interview. So this happened last week, and I'm still cringing just thinking about it. I've been job hunting for a few months now, and I finally landed an interview with a company I really wanted to work for. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. I researched the company, practiced my answers to common interview questions, and even got my clothes ready the night before. I was feeling pretty confident that this was going to be the one. But then, of course, life threw me a curveball. I wasn't fully prepared for what happened, and it's honestly embarrassing how it all went down. Let me set the scene a little bit. I'm in my mid-20s, and while I've been independent for a while now, I still live with my mom. It's not ideal, but it's mostly because I've been saving up for a house, and my mom is one of those people who refuses to let me leave until I'm financially secure. She means well, but sometimes I feel like I'm 10 years old again. The thing is, my mom is super supportive and loves to help me whenever she can. A little too much sometimes, but I try not to mind it. It's her way of showing love, I guess. Anyway, the day of the interview, I woke up early to go over some last-minute details. I told my mom I was going to be leaving soon and that I'd be back after the interview. She's always been a bit too eager when it comes to giving advice and tips about life, but this time, she was especially excited. She came into my room just as I was getting ready to leave, wearing this huge smile on her face. She was like, "I've got this great idea. Why don't I come with you? I can wait in the car while you're inside, and I can be there for moral support." Now, most people would say no to this kind of suggestion. I should have said no, but in my mind I thought, hey, why not? She can just wait in the car. It's not like she'll be in the interview room with me. So I said, "Sure, Mom, if you want to come along, you can. But you have to wait outside. I'm going to be busy with the interview." She was over the moon. She hugged me and started pulling on her jacket. I wasn't really thinking straight at the time, so I just went with it. We got in the car, and I drove us to the company's office. The whole drive over, she kept chatting away, giving me all kinds of advice like remember to smile a lot and don't forget to thank them at the end of the interview. I tried to smile politely and nod, but my stomach was turning. The nerves were starting to kick in, and all I wanted was to get to the interview without any distractions. But of course, I couldn't tell her to stop. She was just trying to be helpful, and I didn't want to hurt her feelings. We arrived at the office, and I parked in the lot. I looked over at her, and she had this proud look on her face. She was practically glowing with excitement. I started to get out of the car, but then she reached out and grabbed my arm. "Wait," she said. "I have something for you." I was confused but curious, so I stopped and looked at her. She pulled out this ridiculously large, tacky keychain from her purse. It was shaped like a giant good luck 4-leaf clover, all sparkly and bright. I stared at it, not sure how to respond. "You have to take it with you," she said, holding out to me like it was the Holy Grail. "It'll bring you good luck during your interview." I honestly didn't know how to react. I wanted to tell her I didn't need it, but at the same time, I didn't want to hurt her feelings. So I took the keychain and stuffed it in my pocket, figuring I'd just leave it there and deal with it later. I gave my mom one last hug, told her I'd be back in an hour, and went inside. I tried to shake off the weirdness of the morning and focus on the interview. The receptionist greeted me and pointed me toward the interview room. I knocked, entered, and took a seat. The interview started off fine. I was nervous, but I thought I was handling it well. The questions were typical. Tell us about yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Why do you want to work here? But then, something unexpected happened. About 10 minutes into the interview, the door to the room suddenly opened. I turned around, surprised, and saw my mom standing there in the doorway with a huge smile on her face. She was holding a coffee cup in one hand and waving at me with the other. "Hi, honey," she said, completely oblivious to the awkward tension in the room. "I just wanted to bring you your favorite coffee. I thought you'd be thirsty." I froze. The interviewers were staring at her in complete silence, and I could see their confusion. I didn't know what to do. My mom was standing there like it was a normal, casual visit, but I could feel my face turning bright red. I quickly got up and walked over to her, trying to steer her out of the room without drawing attention. I could hear one of the interviewers clearing their throat, and I felt like I was sinking into the floor. My mom, still completely unaware of the situation, handed me the coffee and said, "You'll do great, sweetie. Don't forget to smile, okay?" I managed to usher her out of the room, muttering apologies to the interviewers as I went. Once I finally got the door closed behind us, I turned to my mom and whispered, "What are you doing? You can't just walk in there like that." She looked completely shocked, like she had no idea what the big deal was. "I thought it would be nice," she said defensively. "I was just trying to be helpful." I honestly didn't know what to say. I was mortified. I went back inside, and the rest of the interview felt like a blur. I couldn't focus, and I could tell the interviewers were a bit uncomfortable after what had just happened. The whole situation had been completely ruined. I finished the interview as best as I could, but I left feeling like I had no chance of getting the job. Needless to say, I didn't get the job. A few days later, I received a polite rejection email, which I completely expected. I was honestly more embarrassed than disappointed at that point. Looking back, I know I should have just said no to my mom's offer to come with me. I should have stood my ground and told her that it wasn't appropriate. But in the moment, I didn't want to hurt her feelings. Now, I've learned my lesson. Next time I have an important interview, I'm going solo. So, yeah, TIFU by letting my mom help me with my job interview, and I'll be avoiding any more motherly interference in the future. TIFU by accidentally getting my friend fired and then trying to fix it, only making it worse. So, let me take you back a few months. 24M, work in a small office, mostly with people around my age, and we all get along pretty well. There's this one guy, Mark, 25M, who's been a close friend of mine since college. We both started at the company around the same time, and for the first few weeks, we were like a mini team. We worked in different departments, but we'd often meet up during lunch breaks, chat, and vent about work. Nothing too unusual, just typical workplace camaraderie. Anyway, one afternoon, we were having lunch in the break room when Mark started venting about this new intern they hired in his department. Let's call him Luke, 22M. Mark had been pretty clear that Luke was a bit of a slacker, always showing up late, doing the bare minimum, and generally being a hassle. At first, I thought it was just Mark being annoyed by a newbie, but then he started telling me some more details about Luke's behavior. He had been missing meetings, constantly checking his phone, and not really pulling his weight on team projects. Mark even said he overheard Luke making fun of some of the senior staff behind their backs, which definitely didn't sit well with him. Now, I've always been the type of person who tries to stay out of office drama. I know how quickly things can escalate in those environments, and I wasn't planning on getting involved. But then Mark started telling me something that caught my attention. He mentioned that Luke had been making comments about how he didn't really care about getting a permanent position at the company and how he wasn't taking the internship seriously. That struck me as unprofessional, and I made the mistake of thinking that someone in a position of authority should know about this. Here's where things went downhill. Mark and I had just finished eating, and we were getting ready to go back to our desks when I decided to let my good intentions take over. I told Mark, "Hey, you should report Luke's behavior to the manager. If he's really not doing his job and being disrespectful, someone should know about it." Mark, always the more laid-back one, shrugged it off and said something like, "Nah, I don't want to be the guy who gets someone fired. He's just an intern, anyway. But then he added, "It's really starting to affect our team dynamics, though." I didn't know it at the time, but those few words stuck with me. I kept thinking about how Luke was being unprofessional, and the thought of him potentially getting a permanent job after his internship started to bug me. The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that it wasn't just Mark's problem anymore. It was a problem for the whole team. So, in a moment of misguided confidence and stupidity, I decided to take matters into my own hands. The next morning, I walked into the office early, grabbed a coffee, and then drafted an email to our department manager. I detailed everything Mark had told me: Luke's tardiness, lack of work ethic, making fun of senior staff, the whole 9 yards. I even included some of my own observations, like how Luke often disappeared for extended breaks and how he seemed to be on his phone during meetings. I may have exaggerated a little bit in the heat of the moment, trying to emphasize just how problematic Luke was. After all, I was trying to be helpful, right? I sent the email and felt pretty good about it, thinking I had just done the responsible thing and protected the team's interests. What did go wrong? I figured the manager would talk to Luke, maybe give him some feedback, and Luke would shape up. Worst case, he'd be reprimanded a little, but at least he'd know his behavior wasn't acceptable. A few hours later, I got a message from Mark asking me if I had said anything to the manager about Luke. I hesitated for a second, and then it hit me like a ton of bricks. I realized I hadn't exactly told Mark I was going to escalate the situation. I just gone ahead and done it. My stomach dropped. I tried to play it off, saying, "Oh yeah, I sent the email." I thought the manager needed to know. Mark's response was immediate. "Dude, why did you do that? I didn't want to get him fired. You just made it worse. I've been talking to HR about this for a while, and I didn't want it to get out of hand. Now, they're going to make a huge deal out of it." I panicked. I immediately realized what I had done. By sending that email, I had put Mark in a really uncomfortable position. He had been dealing with Luke's behavior, trying to be diplomatic about it, and now I'd just gone behind his back and turned it into an official HR issue. To make matters worse, I had probably painted Luke in a way that made him seem far worse than he actually was. And as if that wasn't enough, I had done it all without consulting Mark, who was actually trying to handle things the right way. I called Mark in a frenzy, apologizing profusely, but I could tell he was already upset. "I don't even know what to say, man. You really screwed this up," he said. It was too late to take the email back. Over the next few hours, I tried to fix things by talking to the manager. I explained that I hadn't meant to go overboard, that I had acted impulsively, and that maybe I had misrepresented the situation. But by then, it was clear that HR had already gotten involved, and they took things way more seriously than I had anticipated. They wanted to investigate, to sit down with Luke and get his side of the story. In the meantime, Mark and I tried to smooth things over with Luke, but it was clear the damage had been done. Luke was absolutely furious, and his internship was cut short. He ended up getting sent home early, and though he wasn't technically fired, it was clear his chances of getting hired permanently were gone. I felt like the biggest idiot. What had started as me trying to help Mark out and prevent a possible hiring decision had turned into a complete mess. I had gotten my friend's office life complicated, made an enemy out of an intern, and created a whole bunch of unnecessary drama. Mark's relationship with HR was strained, and Luke was upset with everyone in the office. For the next couple of weeks, I was walking on eggshells. In the end, I learned a hard lesson about minding my own business. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I ended up making a situation way worse. So, yeah, TIFU by trying to help my friend and instead getting him and everyone else tangled in a web of office politics. TIFU by trying to fix a simple plumbing issue and accidentally flooding my entire apartment building. So, a little backstory. I'm not exactly a handy person. I can't remember the last time I tried to fix something around the house without making it worse. But last week, I found myself staring at a leaking pipe in the bathroom of my apartment, and I thought, hey, this is a simple problem. I've watched enough YouTube videos. How hard can it be? I had just moved into this apartment about 6 months ago. It's a small one-bedroom, not fancy, but it's cozy and works for me. The building itself is old, built in the 70s, and it's definitely seen better days. The kind of place where the water pressure randomly fluctuates, the elevator gets stuck at least once a month, and the walls are thin enough that you can hear your neighbor's late-night karaoke sessions. but still, it was decent. I signed the lease without a second thought. A few days ago, I noticed a small puddle on the floor near the base of the bathroom sink. It wasn't huge, just enough to make the tiles a little damp, but it was there every time I stepped in. At first, I assumed it was just water splashing from the sink, but after a couple of days, I realized something wasn't right. The leak seemed to be coming from the pipes behind the sink. I did what any responsible adult would do and call my landlord. The landlord, an older gentleman named Steve, told me he'd send someone over to look at it. But after a couple of days passed without any sign of a maintenance person, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I figure it couldn't be that hard to tighten a pipe or replace a washer, right? How hard could it be? Spoiler, very hard. I went to the local hardware store and picked up a basic plumbing toolkit. I wasn't about to spend too much, since I was convinced this was going to be a quick fix. The tools were cheap, but I didn't care. I got home, watched a couple of DIY videos on my phone, and felt ready to tackle the problem. Step 1. Shut off the water supply. I turned the knob under the sink, but it didn't feel like it was doing much. I tried turning it harder, but it didn't budge. After several more attempts, I thought, okay, maybe it's just old and needs a little force. I turned it again with all my strength, and this time, it gave way. Unfortunately, the water didn't stop flowing. In fact, it began to gush out at a much higher pressure than I was expecting, and before I knew it, the entire sink was flooding. I panicked, but I was determined not to let this get the best of me. I grabbed a towel to mop up the water, but the flood continued. The water level in the sink kept rising, and it was now spilling over the sides. I tried to turn the water off at the main valve, but I couldn't find it. So I did what any desperate person would do. I called Steve. Steve answered the phone with a groggy voice and listened to me ramble about the flooding sink. I was all over the place, telling him how I couldn't stop the water and I didn't know what was happening. He told me not to worry and promised to come over in 20 minutes. I hung up, feeling a bit better, but also realizing I had just made the situation worse by calling him. The water was everywhere now, spreading across the bathroom floor, and I still hadn't figured out how to stop it. And that's when I made my next big mistake. I had remembered seeing a shut-off valve behind the toilet in the hallway, which controlled the water to the entire apartment. I didn't know what it was for exactly, but I figured if it shut off all the water, it could solve my problems. So I rushed into the hallway, grabbed the valve, and twisted it with all my might. And that's when I heard a horrible, grinding noise. The valve snapped off. Water immediately started pouring out of the exposed pipe in the hallway. It was like a geyser, spraying everywhere. I stood there frozen, horrified by what I had just done. The water kept coming, and no matter how much I tried to shove towels or my hands into the pipe, it was no use. It wasn't stopping. The entire hallway was now flooded. My bathroom was a swamp, and now the hallway was turning into a river. I started running around the apartment like a chicken with its head cut off. I grabbed my phone and tried calling Steve again, but he didn't pick up. I thought I heard his voice earlier, so I was sure he was on his way, but it was taking too long. I had to do something. In my panic, I ended up calling the building's emergency maintenance number. A lady with a calm voice answered. "Hi, what's your emergency?" I explained the situation, stammering my way through the details. She calmly told me someone would be there in about 30 minutes. That was 30 minutes too late for the mess I had made. At this point, the water had spread from the hallway to the neighbor's apartment door across the hall. I was completely beside myself. Then, I remembered, the building had a basement where all the plumbing pipes ran through. I could go down there and shut off the water supply for the entire building. That's what I should have done in the first place, but I had been too focused on trying to fix everything myself. I bolted for the basement, nearly tripping over my own feet. When I got there, I was faced with a labyrinth of pipes and valves. I had no idea which one was the main shut-off valve for the entire building. There were about 10 different valves, all of them looking exactly the same. In my panic, I started twisting knobs at random, hoping one of them would stop the water, but none of them did. I could hear the water still spraying in the hallway upstairs. At this point, I was covered in water from head to toe, exhausted, and felt like I was losing my mind. But then I remembered a phone number that was posted on the wall for building emergencies. I grabbed my phone and dialed it with shaking hands. A man on the other end picked up, and when I explained the situation, he immediately told me to wait right there. He would be over in 10 minutes. Finally, someone who knew what they were doing. When a maintenance guy showed up, he was cool and collected. He quickly identified the problem. Turns out I had snapped off the valve in the hallway and flooded the entire building. He patched up the pipe, turned off the water, and had everything under control in about 15 minutes. It was only then that I realized the extent of my screw-up. Not only had I flooded my apartment, but I had also flooded part of the hallway, and it had spread into 2 other apartments. The building's entire water system was compromised, and the landlord had to bring in professionals to fix everything. The damage was extensive, and it took several days for everything to be repaired. I got the unfortunate privilege of meeting my neighbors who had to deal with the mess I made. The moral of the story? Never try to fix something you don't understand. And always call a professional before you turn your plumbing problem into a building-wide disaster. TIFU by accidentally insulting my boss, losing my job, and almost destroying a company relationship forever. So, this happened a couple of weeks ago, and I still can't wrap my head around it. I was just trying to get through the day like any other, but I managed to somehow mess up my entire career trajectory in the process. I've been a software developer at a mid-sized tech company for about 3 years now. My boss, who I'll call Mr. K, is a pretty chill guy. He's the kind of manager who doesn't hover over your shoulder, lets you have some freedom, and values results more than the hours you spend in the office. I always respected him for that. That morning started like any other. I was running a bit late, as usual, so I grabbed a coffee, quickly checked my emails, and got to work. The first thing on my plate was a code review for a new feature I'd been working on for the past couple of weeks. I knew it was important because it was going to be part of the next big release, and if it went smoothly, we'd be able to meet a deadline with minimal drama. But when I opened my code repository and saw the long list of comments from Mr. K, my stomach dropped. The first comment was fine. He was asking for clarification on a function I had written. But as I scrolled down, I started noticing a trend. Every other comment was more critical, and his tone seemed a little off. I couldn't tell if he was upset with me or just had a lot on his plate. There were no direct insults, but his comments were starting to feel passive-aggressive. I know I tend to get a bit defensive when critiqued. It's a developer thing, but I felt like I needed to respond to these comments immediately. I opened up my text editor and began making changes to the code. But instead of taking my time, I was in this weird headspace where I just wanted to be done with it as fast as possible. So, instead of carefully reworking the code and addressing his comments thoughtfully, I just hacked through the changes, made some surface-level fixes, and pushed it back for review. At that point, I was feeling a little frustrated and decided to let off some steam. I know it was a terrible idea, but I decided to vent in our team chat. We have a group chat where we talk about work-related stuff, but occasionally we'll joke around, post memes, or just chat about random things. I had just finished pushing the code, so I sent a message to the group. Mr. K's comments today are something else. It's like he's trying to make me cry or something. Pretty sure he hates this feature, but instead of telling me directly, he just passive-aggressively comments on everything. Seriously, if I ever needed a reminder that I'm just a cog in the machine, this was it. It was meant to be a lighthearted rant. Nothing too serious. Just a little frustration. But I didn't realize at the time that I had accidentally sent that message to Mr. K himself. Now, here's where the real mess begins. The way our company uses Slack, it's easy to mix up the channels, especially when you're replying quickly and in a state of mild frustration. I didn't realize I had typed my message in the wrong channel. And that was a problem because at the moment I hit enter, Mr. K was in the chat, reading it. I didn't even notice he was online until he immediately replied with a single word. Really, I froze. The blood drained from my face. My brain went into overdrive, trying to process what had just happened. I quickly checked the chat history and realized that I had sent my rant directly to him. I had called his comments passive-aggressive and implied that he hated the feature I was working on. I immediately wanted to crawl under a rock and die. I tried to quickly backpedal, but my fingers fumbled on the keyboard, and the damage was already done. I started typing. "Oh, Mr. K, I didn't mean it like that. It was just a dumb joke with the team, I swear. I wasn't talking about you personally. It's just that the feedback today was a bit tough to digest, but I really value your opinion, seriously. I didn't mean any harm." But before I could finish, Mr. K responded, I think we need to have a talk. Come to my office. At that point, my stomach felt like it was in my throat. I had no idea what kind of conversation this was going to be, but it definitely wasn't going to be a good one. I walked to his office, trying to figure out how I could possibly salvage the situation. My mind was racing, but I couldn't think of anything that would make it better. When I walked in, Mr. K didn't immediately say anything. He just stared at me for a long moment, and I could feel the tension in the room. Finally, he spoke. I've been reading your code for the past few months, and I'm starting to wonder if you're taking me seriously. I know I'm tough on reviews, but it's because I care about the quality of the work we put out there. But I don't appreciate being disrespected, especially when you think I'm not around. What you said in that message, about me personally, it's not okay. I could feel my face turning red with embarrassment, and I honestly couldn't think of anything to say. I tried to apologize again, but it felt like the words weren't coming out right. I just kept digging myself into a deeper hole. It was clear that the damage had been done. After a long, awkward silence, Mr. K finally spoke again. I'll be honest, I'm disappointed. This is a mistake you'll have to learn from. I don't think you meant to go this far, but you have to understand that words matter, even if they're just typed out in a moment of frustration. It's not just about the code, it's about how we treat each other. I'm not sure if you're going to be a good fit here anymore, if this is how you handle things. At that moment, I realized I was about to lose my job over something that could have been avoided if I had just kept my mouth shut. I didn't know how to fix it, and I felt completely powerless. The only thing I could do was apologize again and again and promise that I would learn from it. Mr. K let me stew in my own guilt for a few minutes before finally telling me, I'm going to give you one more chance. I'm not firing you today, but I expect better behavior in the future. If this happens again, I won't be so lenient. I was so relieved I nearly cried, but I knew this was a wake-up call. I had almost ruined everything I'd worked for because I couldn't keep my emotions in check. I left his office feeling like I had narrowly avoided disaster. It's been a couple of weeks now, and I'm still working at the company. Things have been awkward, but I've done my best to keep my head down and prove that I'm not a problem employee. But every now and then, I catch myself thinking about that moment and wondering how close I came to losing it all. Lesson learned: never, ever vent in a public chat when you're upset, especially when your boss is one click away from reading it. I'll be keeping my frustrations to myself from now on. Hey friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what could be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by accidentally ruining my best friend's wedding because I couldn't stop laughing. So, this all started last summer when my best friend, Emily, got engaged. Emily and I had been inseparable since middle school. We shared everything from secrets to our love of terrible rom-coms, and our bond had only grown stronger as we got older. We both went through some tough times in high school, but we stuck by each other, and I couldn't have been more excited when she asked me to be her maid of honor. The engagement party was perfect. Emily was glowing, and her fiancé, Matt, was every bit as charming as he was when they first met. It was clear that these two were meant to be together. Everyone was talking about how gorgeous their upcoming wedding was going to be, and Emily had already started planning every little detail. She had spent months organizing everything, and it was shaping up to be the wedding of the century in our small town. The day of the wedding finally arrived, and I was full of excitement and nerves. I had been preparing for this moment for months, getting my speech ready and making sure everything would go smoothly. Emily had a vision for her day, and I knew how much it meant to her. The wedding was being held at a beautiful vineyard just outside of town. It was a perfect location for the outdoor ceremony. Everything was set up beautifully: flowers, tables, chairs, the whole 9 yards. I thought I had everything under control, but there was one tiny issue. You see, I'm a type of person who finds it nearly impossible to keep a straight face in serious situations. Some people get the nervous giggles, others get the nervous sweats. Me, I get the nervous laughter. It's an uncontrollable, stupid, laugh until you cry kind of thing. It has caused me problems in the past, like that time I laughed through an entire job interview. They didn't call me back, but I thought I had grown out of it, or at least I hoped I had. I woke up that morning feeling jittery but excited. I put on my bridesmaid dress, bright red, floor length, and flattering in all the right places. As I stepped out of the hotel room, my phone buzzed with a text from Emily. It was a photo of her in her wedding dress, and she looked stunning. I knew this was going to be the best day of her life, and I couldn't wait to see her walk down the aisle. The ceremony was going beautifully. The weather was perfect, the music was serene, and everyone was tearing up as Emily and Matt exchanged vows. I stood up beside Emily as her maid of honor, trying to keep my cool. I was focused on being supportive, but my mind kept drifting back to one thought. Don't laugh. Don't laugh. As the officiant started talking about love and commitment, I felt a tickle in my throat. I had just gotten over a cold, and for some reason, that day, my allergies were acting up again. I tried to suppress it, but before I knew it, I felt a sudden, uncontrollable urge to sneeze. So, I did what anyone would do. I tried to stifle it. But the sneeze turned into a weird snort-laugh hybrid. It wasn't loud, but it was definitely noticeable. I tried to cover my face, hoping no one would hear me, but the more I tried to suppress it, the worse it got. I could feel the giggles bubbling up from my stomach. It was like trying to hold in a balloon that kept expanding, and I could feel my face turning bright red. Matt and Emily, standing right in front of me, turned toward me, their faces full of confusion. I could see Emily's eyes narrow slightly, a look that said, "Are you really laughing at my wedding right now?" But that's when the worst part happened. As I tried to calm myself down, I accidentally looked at the flower girl, a little girl about 5 years old, who was standing a few feet in front of me. She was staring up at me with wide eyes, and for some reason, the innocent look on her face sent me over the edge. The laugh finally burst out of me, loud, snorty, and way too inappropriate for the situation. I tried to cover it with a cough, but it was no use. There was a brief moment of silence. The guests were all looking at me, some with raised eyebrows, some with concerned expressions. Emily's face went from confused to horrified in a split second. Matt, who had been smiling during their vows, suddenly looked like he was reconsidering his life choices. The officiant, bless his heart, just awkwardly cleared his throat, trying to carry on. But it didn't end there. No, of course not. The sneeze, laugh, snort was only the beginning. As the ceremony continued, every time I tried to focus on anything other than my uncontrollable laughter, my mind went straight to a panic spiral. I kept imagining that one time in high school when I laughed during a moment that should have been serious and how embarrassed I was. That memory only made the giggles worse. I looked at Emily again. She had tried to smile at me, but her eyes were wide with frustration. Matt was now awkwardly holding her hand as if he was trying to keep everything together. The more I tried to focus on their vows, the worse it got. At this point, I wasn't even sure if I was crying from laughter or if my allergies were finally getting the best of me. But the laughter just kept coming in waves, and I couldn't stop. Then, in a final, desperate attempt to regain some composure, I bent down to pick up the bouquet of flowers I had dropped earlier in the chaos. And that's when it happened. I tripped. In front of everyone. In front of the bride. In front of the groom. And, of course, I didn't just trip. I did the full-on cartoonish face-first dive onto grass. The bouquet flew up in the air, and I ended up in a heap of tangled limbs, snorting like a pig while trying to stand up. There was a horrified gasp from the crowd, followed by an awkward silence. Emily blinked a few times, processing the entire sequence of events. Then, the unthinkable happened. She started laughing. Not just a chuckle, full-on belly laughs. The kind of laugh that you can't control. Her laugh was contagious, and soon, the rest of the guests joined in. They weren't laughing at me. They were laughing at the sheer absurdity of the situation. And in that moment, I realized that the entire wedding had shifted from serious to something else entirely. The rest of the ceremony was a blur. Matt tried to salvage it by making a joke, but by then, we were all in tears from laughing so hard. I can't even remember the vows or the speeches anymore, just that everyone was laughing, including Emily. Afterwards, I tried to apologize to her, but Emily just hugged me and said, "I'll never forget this day." So, yeah, I ruined my best friend's wedding by laughing uncontrollably through the whole thing, tripping over my own feet, and making a complete fool of myself in front of everyone. But in the end, Emily and Matt got married, and they both seemed to find it just as hilarious as I did. It was probably the most embarrassing day of my life, but it also turned out to be one of the best weddings I've ever been to. The laughter, the love, and the chaos somehow made it even more memorable. TIFU by accidentally causing a huge scene at a wedding because of a typo in my speech. So, this happened last weekend, and I still can't believe how much of a disaster it turned into. It all started when my best friend, Sam, asked me to be the best man at his wedding. Naturally, I was honored. We've been friends since college, and I've seen him through everything: relationships, family issues, awkward phases, the works. He's basically my brother from another mother, and I would have done anything to support him. Everything seemed pretty straightforward at first. I was tasked with the usual best man duties: give a toast, make sure the groom doesn't panic, help with whatever needs doing, and, of course, make sure I didn't do anything stupid, which, as we'll see, I spectacularly failed to do. Now, I don't really get nervous in front of crowds. I've spoken in front of big audiences before: presentations, speeches, the occasional thank you at family gatherings. But Sam's wedding? It was different. This wasn't just another speech. It was a major life event for my best friend, and I needed to nail it. Plus, there was this additional pressure because his family is super formal and, well, they're a little judgmental. I knew I had to come across as polished, mature, and capable. So, I spent days working on my speech. I started writing it well in advance, rehearsing in front of the mirror, practicing my delivery with some whiskey. I thought it would help calm the nerves, okay? Everything was coming together, and I was feeling pretty confident. But here's where things went horribly wrong. The night before the wedding, I realized I had sent the speech as a draft to the group chat with Sam, his fiancée, and a few other close friends for feedback. I had it saved on my phone, ready to go, and I thought it would be a good idea to review it one last time before I printed it out. So, there I was sitting on the couch in my hotel room, checking over my speech in the Notes app. As I was scrolling through it, I noticed a tiny typo in the first paragraph: groom's speech instead of bride's speech. Nothing major, but I wanted to correct it, and I figured it would be the perfect time to make a quick edit. Unfortunately, I made one of the worst mistakes possible. I didn't update the draft properly. I thought I had just edited the typo, but what actually happened was I accidentally replaced the entire first paragraph with a random chunk of text from a previous message I had sent earlier that day. To make matters worse, I didn't even realize it until it was too late. Fast forward to the wedding day, and everything was running smoothly. The ceremony was beautiful. Everything was picture perfect. Sam and his bride, Lucy, looked amazing. The vows were heartfelt, and the venue was just as stunning as you could imagine. The reception followed, and it was a blast. The food was delicious, the dancing was fun, and people were really enjoying themselves. I had a couple of drinks to loosen up, but I kept it together. Then, it was time for the best man speech. I was feeling a mix of excitement and nerves as I stood up, glass of champagne in hand, ready to do my thing. The guests were all staring at me, and I could feel my palms sweating, but I was confident. I had practiced this a million times. I took a deep breath and began. Good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be here today as Sam's best man. When Sam asked me to stand by his side today, I was really touched. It's not every day that you get to witness one of your closest friends marry the love of their life. I remember when Sam met Lucy and how she made him a better person, but more importantly, how she's always made him smile. I think we can all agree that Sam is a lucky guy to have found such an amazing woman to spend the rest of his life with. Everyone was nodding and smiling. So far, so good. I felt good about it. I continued. As many of you know, I've been through a lot with Sam. From college parties to late-night conversations about life and love, I've seen him grow into the man he is today. He's always been someone who cares deeply about the people around him, and Lucy is no exception. Together, they make an incredible pair. I'm so happy to be here with all of you today and to celebrate this beautiful union. At this point, I was feeling pretty confident, but then I got to the second part of my speech. The one I thought I had edited, but clearly hadn't. I glanced at my notes on the page, took another deep breath, and launched into what I thought was my heartfelt message. So, a little about myself and the bride's speech, which I'm sure everyone here has been eagerly waiting for. Let me start by saying that I have known Lucy for a while now, and I think we can all agree that she is a stunning woman. She's intelligent, caring, and has a heart of gold. But what I think is most special about her is her ability to make Sam feel like the best version of himself. I've never seen him as happy as he is when he's with her, and I truly believe they're going to have an incredible life together. Wait, hold on. Did I really just say that? Did I seriously just call Lucy the bride's speech? That was not supposed to be there. I froze mid-sentence, staring down at my notes. The room had gone quiet. The awkwardness was palpable. I could see Sam's face go pale, and his parents were visibly cringing. I quickly tried to cover it up. Sorry, I meant groom speech. You know what I mean? Let's move on. But that wasn't the end of it. The rest of my speech was a train wreck. I tried to make jokes, but the crowd wasn't having it. They just stared at me, confused and uncomfortable. I could feel the sweat on my forehead, and every word I said just seemed to make it worse. By the time I finally finished, I was ready to just crawl into a hole and die. As I sat back down, I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Sam gave me a weak, awkward smile, and his fiancée, Lucy, didn't even look my way. I wanted to apologize immediately, but the evening was so tense, I just didn't know how to fix it. The rest of the reception felt like a blur. People were polite, but the atmosphere had shifted. I knew I had messed up. To make matters worse, the next day, I found out that someone had recorded my speech and posted it to the wedding group chat. My friends were all laughing about it, but in that, oh God, this is so awkward kind of way. I'm pretty sure some people in Sam's family will never let me live it down. So yeah, TIFU by screwing up my best man's speech, making a mess of my notes, and causing an uncomfortable moment at my best friend's wedding. TIFU by trying to impress my friends with my cooking skills. So, let me set the scene for you. I've always been one of those people who enjoys cooking. I'm no professional, but I can follow a recipe pretty well, and over the years, I've developed a decent repertoire of meals. I'm that guy who's always watching cooking shows, testing out new techniques, and pretending I'm on MasterChef every time I make dinner. My friends know this about me, and because of it, they've always asked me to cook for gatherings, parties, or just casual get-togethers. A few weeks ago, one of my friends, let's call him Mike, invited me to his house for a small party. It was a casual thing, just a few people, a couple of drinks, and some lighthearted hanging out. He mentioned that there would be a few new people there, including a couple of his coworkers, and he asked if I'd be willing to cook something for the group. I agreed almost immediately, but then a thought hit me. This was the perfect opportunity to show off, to really wow everyone. I mean, what better way to solidify my status as the go-to guy for all things culinary than by cooking something impressive? I spent the next couple of days planning the menu. I didn't want to just make some basic pasta or tacos. No, this needed to be something fancy. Something that would make people take a step back and go, wow, this guy really knows his stuff. After some thought, I decided on making a homemade beef Wellington. It's one of those dishes that requires precision, and if done right, it's guaranteed to impress. I never made it before, but I figured, how hard could it be? Plus, I had watched countless cooking shows where they made it look so easy. The day of the party, I was feeling pretty confident. I had all my ingredients: beef tenderloin, mushrooms, prosciutto, puff pastry, and the all-important Dijon mustard. I got to Mike's place early, ready to get things started. The kitchen was small, but I wasn't too concerned. I'd done plenty of cooking in cramped spaces before. What I didn't anticipate was how much attention I'd be under. Mike had invited a few more people than he originally mentioned, including some of his coworkers, and suddenly, I was the center of attention in a room full of strangers. They gathered around, sipping their drinks, watching me chop mushrooms, season the beef, and roll out the pastry. Everything seemed to be going well at first. I was cooking with confidence, cracking jokes to keep the atmosphere light. But then disaster struck. I'd gotten so caught up in trying to impress that I missed a crucial step in the recipe. Instead of properly searing the beef tenderloin before wrapping in the prosciutto, I just threw it straight into the oven. For those of you who don't know, searing the beef is an important step because it locks in all the juices, creating a nice crust that keeps the beef tender and flavorful. Without it, the meat tends to come out a little dry and bland. But I didn't realize this until I was halfway through the process, and by then, it was too late to fix it. I brushed it off at first, thinking it'll be fine. The puff pastry will save it. But as I continued to assemble the Wellington, I started to feel more and more uneasy. The puff pastry was a little too thick in some spots, and I hadn't let it chill long enough, so it wasn't holding together as well as I hoped. I was getting flustered, trying to salvage the dish in front of all these people who were staring at me like I was some kind of culinary wizard. The pressure was mounting, but I refused to let it show. I kept cracking jokes, kept the conversation going, but deep down, I knew I was messing up. Finally, the Wellington went into the oven, and I had a few minutes to breathe. I tried to focus on something else, but my mind kept wandering back to the disaster I was pretty sure I had created. People were still hanging around, talking, and drinking, but I could sense their growing curiosity. They could tell something was off. The oven timer finally went off, and I pulled out the Wellington, trying to maintain my composure. I sat on the counter, feeling a wave of nervousness wash over me as I sliced it open. The moment the knife cut through the puff pastry, I knew it was over. The beef was overcooked. Not dry and tough, but certainly not as tender as it should have been. It looked fine on the outside, but the inside was a sad, grayish color that screamed not properly seared. I could feel the room go quiet as I plated it and served it to the guests, each one giving me a polite smile as they took a bite. And then it happened. Mike's co-worker, a woman named Emily, who I'd been trying to impress with my culinary skills, took a bite and immediately winced. I think I might have overcooked it a little," I said nervously, but nobody laughed. In fact, the awkward silence that followed was deafening. Emily tried to mask her reaction, but it was clear that the beef wasn't the star of the show. It was dry, flavorless, and definitely not the perfect melt-in-your-mouth beef Wellington that I had imagined in my head. Mike, noticing the growing discomfort in the room, quickly changed the subject, but I could tell my reputation was hanging by a thread. The rest of the evening was a blur. People nibbled at the food, tried to make the best of it, but the damage was done. The cooking fiasco became the main topic of conversation, and not in the way I had hoped. Everyone seemed to have a story about the time they tried to cook something fancy and failed. They laughed it off, but I could tell that my culinary pride had taken a serious hit. As the night ended, I quickly made my exit, feeling embarrassed and defeated. On the drive home, I reflected on what had happened. I had been so focused on impressing people that I had lost sight of the basics. I learned a valuable lesson that night. It's better to stick to what you know and keep it simple than to try to do something way above your skill level just for the sake of impressing others. I still love cooking, but I've learned to take things down a notch and leave the fancy dishes for the professionals. TIFU by trying to impress my boss with a simple DIY project and nearly destroying the office. So, this happened last week, and I'm still processing the events that unfolded. A little backstory first. I work in a small tech company, and recently, we've been trying up the office vibes. My boss, let's call him Greg, has been encouraging all of us to pitch in and make the place feel more personal. There's an office makeover initiative going on, and while most people just brought in plants or framed pictures, I thought I could take it a step further and really impress Greg. Spoiler, it did not go according to plan. A few months ago, I saw this viral video of someone creating a custom wooden bookshelf with a unique design. It was one of those easy DIY projects that make you think, hey, I could totally do that. The project in the video had this cool, rustic vibe and was surprisingly minimal, so I thought it would look great in our office. We have this dead space by the break room that could use a little decoration, and I figured a custom bookshelf would not only fill the space, but it would also show Greg that I'm a creative, go-getter kind of employee. Plus, the project seemed fairly straightforward, and I'd get to use a power drill, which always feels cool. I decided to take on the task without asking for anyone's help because, well, who needs help with a DIY project, right? I had my trusty toolbox, a vague idea of what I needed, and a lot of misplaced confidence. Greg had mentioned once that we could use some extra storage, so I took that as a green light to just go for it. I didn't even bother measuring the space. I figured eyeballing it would be enough. It's just a bookshelf, right? How hard could it be? The first thing I did was buy wood planks from the local hardware store. There was a massive sale, so I grabbed a few extra pieces just in case. I didn't know much about wood, but I knew enough to make sure I got the nice kind. I also bought some brackets, screws, and a level, finally, some professionalism. My plan was to use the brackets to hang the shelves on the wall, so they'd look sleek and modern. I spent hours in my apartment cutting the planks to size, drilling holes in the wood, and assembling the shelves. It wasn't going perfectly, but I thought it was coming together pretty well. The whole time I was thinking about how Greg would be so impressed by my efforts. The next day, I brought everything into the office. I was determined to finish the project during my lunch break. I told Greg that I was going to work on something cool for the office, and he was genuinely excited. He even gave me a thumbs up when he saw the wood planks. I was feeling pretty great about it, ready to be the office hero. I figured if I could pull this off, I might even get a little recognition. Maybe Greg would mention me in the next company meeting. The possibilities were endless. Now, the first mistake I made was not considering the layout of the office. The break room wall was actually full of pipes that ran behind the drywall. I had no clue, of course, but that didn't stop me from going at it like a man on a mission. I didn't bring a stud finder or anything to check where the pipes or stud were located. I just figured I could screw the brackets into the wall at random intervals. I started drilling the first hole, and boom, there was a strange metallic sound. I figured it was just the wall being weird. Nope, I'd hit something. I tried to pull the drill out, but the bit was stuck. I panicked and twisted it more, which made a loud crack. By this point, my coworkers had started peeking over their desks to see what was going on. It wasn't until I yanked the drill out that I saw the problem. There, sticking out of the hole I had just drilled, was a burst of water. At first, I thought I just cracked a pipe and that it was maybe a small leak. But then, the water started coming out with force, spraying the entire wall. I froze. I had no idea what to do. It was like the office had turned into a scene from a disaster movie. People started running around, yelling and scrambling for towels and buckets, and there I was, standing there like a deer in headlights, holding a power drill that was now dripping with water. The worst part? Greg was walking into the break room at that exact moment, and he saw me covered in water and looking completely lost. Greg's eyes went wide, and he shouted, "What the hell just happened?" I tried to explain, but all that came out of my mouth was a jumbled mess of I didn't think there were pipes in the wall, and I just wanted to build a shelf. He didn't say anything, but I could see the horror in his face as he processed what I'd done. At this point, the water was pouring out of the hole like a mini waterfall, and I could hear it dripping onto the floor below. People were scrambling to grab buckets and towels, but the water wasn't slowing down. Long story short, I had punctured a water pipe running through the break room wall. And it wasn't just a small burst. I somehow managed to hit the main line. The entire break room was now flooded, and people were freaking out, trying to salvage their lunches and laptops. Greg called the building maintenance guy, and after about an hour, they managed to turn off the water supply and patch up the hole. But the damage had already been done. The break room was unusable for the rest of the day, and our company's plumbing was not happy with me. To make matters worse, I had to explain to HR what happened. I don't think I've ever felt more embarrassed in my life. The HR person wasn't even mad. She was just confused about how someone could manage to flood the office with a drill. Greg, of course, did not mention my creative office project again, and now every time I walk by that break room, people give me the look. You know, that look where they know you screwed up, and they just don't know whether to laugh or cry. In the end, I did learn a few things. 1, never assume you know what's behind a wall. 2, always measure twice. And 3, don't ever, under any circumstances, think you can impress your boss with a DIY project involving power tools. I'm still dealing with the fallout, but at least I got a new nickname, Waterboy. So, yeah, that's how I tried to make a cool bookshelf for the office and ended up flooding the break room. Never again. TIFU by trying to fix my own plumbing and flooding the entire basement. So, I've always been a pretty independent person, and I pride myself on being able to handle basic DIY tasks around the house. If something breaks, I'll look up a YouTube tutorial, gather the necessary tools, and just go for it. It's not that I'm super handy, but I like the sense of accomplishment when I fix something myself. Well, that all came crashing down recently when I tried to tackle a plumbing issue in the basement, and it ended up being a complete disaster. It all started when I noticed the basement smelled a bit musty. At first, I thought it was just because the furnace had been running nonstop since winter started, and maybe the air was a little stale. But after a few days, the smell got worse. I started to get a little concerned, so I went down there to investigate. As soon as I opened the basement door, it hit me, a foul, sewage-like stench. I gagged and looked around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. At first, I thought it might be a pipe issue, or worse, something had backed up in the sewer system. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I Googled the issue. I didn't want to call a plumber because, let's face it, they're expensive, and I figured I could handle it. I found a few blog posts and YouTube videos that seemed to be the answer. I just needed to locate the problem, clear the clog, and then everything would be fine. I grabbed a pair of rubber gloves, a wrench, and a plunger, and went down to the basement. The pipes under the sink seemed fine, so I checked the drain in the floor. That was when I noticed it. A bit of water had gathered around the drain, and the water was slightly murky. This was definitely not good. My instincts told me there was something blocking the drain, which meant it was time to take action. Now, I wasn't entirely sure what I was dealing with. The drain looked like it led to some kind of sewage line or main pipe, but I didn't know much about plumbing. I decided to unscrew the drain cover and see if I could find the blockage. I wasn't prepared for what I found. As soon as I removed the cover, a small amount of water started to trickle out, followed by a thick, foul-smelling sludge. It wasn't just water. It was like a mix of dirt, grease, and something that I really didn't want to think about. At this point, I panicked a little. The smell was overwhelming, and I could feel the bile rise in the back of my throat. But I knew I had to fix it, so I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and reached for the plunger. After a few minutes of plunging, nothing seemed to be happening. The water around the drain wasn't draining, and the sludge had only gotten thicker. I didn't want to give up just yet, so I figured I'd go for the next option. I had read somewhere online that pouring a little baking soda and vinegar down a drain could help clear out blockages, so I grabbed both from the pantry and dumped a generous amount into the drain. Nothing. The water was still just sitting there, stagnating. I was getting desperate now, so I grabbed my phone and searched for a how to unclog a drain tutorial. The video I found had some guy using a power auger to clear a drain, and the comments said it worked wonders. I had never used one of those before, but I wasn't about to let this plumbing problem get the best of me. I drove to the local hardware store and rented one for the day. When I got home, I was already feeling a little cocky. How hard could it be to use a power auger? I had watched a video. I was practically an expert now. I set the auger up and began to feed it into the drain, slowly and carefully. At first, it seemed like it was going okay. The auger was winding into the pipe, and I could hear a bit of resistance, which I took as a good sign. But then disaster struck. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but when I tried to feed the auger in further, I must have miscalculated the pressure or the angle, and before I knew it, the auger kicked back and yanked out of my hands. In the process, the nozzle of the auger shot water and sludge straight up into the air like a geyser, spraying the entire basement in filthy water. I was soaked instantly. My shirt, pants, and shoes were drenched in this nasty, smelly, brown water. I couldn't believe it. I had no idea what I had just done. The basement was now flooded with sewage water, and it was spreading fast. I quickly turned off the auger and stood there in a mixture of disbelief and horror. What had started as a small, manageable problem was now a full-scale disaster. The water wasn't just in the corner anymore. It was creeping across the entire basement floor, and I could already see it seeping into the carpeted area I had downstairs as a makeshift gym. At this point, I realized I had two options: call a plumber and admit defeat, or try to fix it myself. As much as I wanted to take responsibility for my actions and avoid more embarrassment, I knew I was in over my head. So I made the call. The plumber arrived about an hour later, and I'll be honest, I think he could smell the fear on me. He took one look at the basement, which was now a mix of dirty water and sewage, and sighed. He didn't say anything, but I could tell he was thinking, what kind of idiot tries to fix their own plumbing without any experience? It turns out the problem was much more severe than I had initially thought. The pipe leading out of the basement had completely backed up with debris and sludge, which I had made worse by trying to clear it myself. The plumber had to bring in specialized equipment to clear the blockage, which took several hours. As he worked, I could only stand there, feeling like a complete fool. When it was finally over, the plumber gave me a rundown of what went wrong. Apparently, the clog was way deeper in the system than I realized, and my attempts to unclog it just made things worse. I had flooded my basement, destroyed part of the carpet, and added a hefty plumbing bill to my expenses. All in all, the damage was way worse than if I had just called a professional in the first place. The lesson here is simple. Sometimes it's better to just call an expert instead of trying to handle everything yourself. I'll never again try to tackle plumbing issues without knowing exactly what I'm doing. The whole ordeal cost me a lot more time, money, and embarrassment than I ever could have imagined. TLDR, tried to fix a plumbing issue in the basement by myself, flooded the entire basement with sewage water, and had to call a plumber to fix my mess. TIFU by accidentally sending an inappropriate text to my boss during a work crisis. So, let me take you back to last Tuesday. It was one of those days at work where everything seemed to go wrong. I'm in a pretty high-stress position. Let's just say I'm in management in a tech company, and our latest product launch had turned into a disaster. Our customer service was flooded with complaints, the engineering team was scrambling to fix bugs, and the marketing department was desperately trying to salvage the PR nightmare that was unfolding. The morning started with me getting in early for a meeting with my boss, who is a pretty no-nonsense type of guy. He's always on top of everything, and I try to impress him by staying organized and proactive. However, this week, it felt like nothing I did was working. My team was behind on every deliverable, and it seemed like no one could give me a straight answer. Stress levels were through the roof, and I was rapidly approaching my breaking point. At around noon, I finally got a text from my boss. He asked for an update on the situation and wanted to know how I was handling things with the team. I don't know if any of you have had a moment where you're just so stressed that you're barely keeping it together, but that was me at that moment. I was getting bombarded with 1,000 different tasks and barely had time to think, let alone respond with anything coherent. I decided to take a deep breath and reply to my boss, but in that moment, I got distracted by a ping on Slack from one of my employees. It was an urgent issue, and I had to reply quickly to avoid further chaos. So, as I was mid-reply, I quickly glanced at my phone to respond to my boss. I typed out what I thought was a professional, calm response, but, well, this is where I messed up. I was so stressed that I didn't realize I had switched apps in the process of typing. Instead of texting my boss, I was texting my best friend, who happens to work at the same company, but in a completely different department. My friend and I have a pretty irreverent sense of humor, and our conversations often lean towards sarcasm and complaining about work. Without thinking, I sent the following message to my boss. Honestly, I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of shit right now. If I wasn't so deep into this mess, I'd probably just quit and go work at a coffee shop or something. I can't keep juggling all this crap. If the higher-ups want this to be fixed, they need to step up and start fixing some of their own problems instead of dumping them all on us. Now, imagine being in my shoes for a second. You just typed an extremely inappropriate, completely unprofessional rant that you intended for your friend, but instead sent it to your boss, who is also the CEO of the company. I didn't realize the mistake until about 10 minutes later when my phone buzzed with an incoming email notification. I opened it up to find a message from my boss that read, "Let's talk about this when you have a minute. I expect a more professional response in the future." I froze. I felt like the room was spinning. The email was short, to the point, and just enough to send my heart into a full-on panic attack. I immediately opened my messages to see what I'd sent. My stomach sank as I saw that. In fact, the message was meant for my friend and not my boss. For a split second, I considered trying to cover it up by texting my boss and saying I'd sent that message by mistake. But no, there was no way that would work. The message was too far gone. I'd just thrown a grenade into the middle of my career, and the fallout was inevitable. I did what any rational person would do in this situation. I texted my friend and screamed at her in a panic. She was at her desk, so she could see the messages in real time. She immediately burst into laughter at the whole situation, which did absolutely nothing to help calm me down. I had no choice but to walk into my boss's office. When I knocked, he motioned me in with a stern look on his face. I could feel my palms sweating as I walked in, try to come up with some kind of reasonable explanation. As soon as I sat down, he got straight to the point. "I assume you're aware of the message you sent me," he said, his voice cool and calculated. "Why, yes, I'm aware," I stammered. I made a huge mistake. That message was meant for my friend. I, I don't know what happened, but it's not what I think you're interpreting. I was frustrated he cut me off. Look, I understand that things are tough right now, but that kind of language and attitude has no place in our company. You're in a leadership position, and we expect professionalism at all times. Do you understand that? I nodded, completely mortified. Yes, of course. I'm so sorry. I'll make sure this doesn't happen again. He sighed and rubbed his eyes, clearly trying to keep his cool. I'll be honest with you. I'm disappointed. I expect better from you. And I hope this is a lesson in how not to communicate under pressure. At this point, I was so embarrassed I could hardly look him in the eye. My brain was running a million miles a minute, trying to figure out how to recover from this disaster. But the only thing I could think to say was, I understand. It won't happen again. The meeting ended after a few more awkward minutes of silence. I left his office, feeling like I had just been slapped across the face. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, trying to get through my work without making any more massive mistakes. Later that evening, I got a message from my friend asking if I had survived the meeting. She, of course, had no idea how badly I was freaking out, so she was still laughing about the whole thing. I told her I wasn't sure if I had just ruined my career, but at least I still had my sense of humor for now. To my surprise, the next day my boss pulled me aside again, but this time he was more relaxed. Look, we all make mistakes, he said. I appreciate your honesty in admitting it, and I think you've learned your lesson. Just remember, we're all under a lot of pressure, but professionalism is key, especially when things go wrong. You're a valuable part of this team, and I don't want to lose that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He had actually forgiven me, albeit with a stern reminder. The whole thing could have gone much worse, but it wasn't the career-ending disaster I had imagined. So, here's the lesson I've learned. Always double-check who you're texting before you send something, especially when you're under pressure. And maybe, just maybe, leave the sarcasm for after hours when you're venting to friends. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a home-cooked dinner and ending up in the ER. So, a little background. I, 28M, have had a massive crush on this girl, Sarah, 26F, for months. We've been friends for a while now, but recently I've been trying to work up the courage to ask her out. She's super sweet, funny, and incredibly down-to-earth, which makes me feel both excited and nervous around her. After talking about it with some friends, I figured I'd do something bold. I'd invite her over for dinner. You know, show her that I'm a capable, charming guy who knows his way around a kitchen. Nothing says date material like a home-cooked meal, right? Now, I'm no Gordon Ramsay. In fact, the extent of my cooking experience up until that point consisted of basic stuff, ramen, scrambled eggs, and the occasional grilled cheese. But how hard could it be to throw together a nice meal for two? I figured I'd go all out with something impressive, so I decided on a homemade Italian dinner. Spaghetti carbonara, a side of garlic bread, and a classic Caesar salad. It's simple, delicious, and I thought a safe bet. I had seen the recipe online a dozen times, so I felt like I had a handle on it. I went to the store that afternoon and grabbed all the ingredients I needed. As I walked down the aisles, I kept imagining how the night would go. I'd cook, we'd eat, have some wine, maybe laugh about something, and then, who knows, maybe I'd get a kiss on the cheek as she left. All my fantasies involved me being the suave, confident guy who had everything together. I didn't really prepare for things to go off the rails, but looking back, I should have. The first sign that I was in over my head came when I realized I didn't actually own a pan that was big enough to cook the pasta and sauce simultaneously. No big deal, I thought. I just used 2 pans. Problem solved. Little did I know, my apartment kitchen was about to become a disaster zone. As the evening approached, I set up the table and poured myself a glass of wine to calm my nerves. I had everything ready. Sarah was about to arrive, and I was feeling pretty proud of myself. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang, and my heart skipped a beat. I rushed to open the door, smiling like an idiot, and there she was, looking stunning as always. We exchanged pleasantries, and she complimented my charming little apartment, which, of course, made me blush. I invited her in, and we chatted while I finished setting up the food. At this point, I was running a little behind schedule because, like I mentioned, I had no idea what I was doing in the kitchen, but Sarah was being super patient and understanding. I put the pasta on to boil, and then I cracked open the eggs for the carbonara sauce. This is where things started to get tricky. The recipe I was following said to combine eggs, cheese, and some of the pasta water to create the sauce. But my eggs just weren't blending well, and I was getting kind of anxious. Sarah was standing nearby, browsing through some of my books, so I decided to quickly add some more cheese to thicken things up. Bad idea. I had miscalculated the amount of cheese I needed, and now my sauce was thickening into something closer to a cement mix than a silky, creamy texture. I had no choice but to keep stirring, praying it would somehow work out. I was so focused on this mess that I didn't notice the garlic bread in the oven, which had begun to smoke. When I opened the oven to check, I was greeted by a cloud of black smoke. Now the situation was truly falling apart. Sarah, who was trying her best to be polite, noticed the smoke and immediately went to open the windows, trying to clear the air. I'm sure she was wondering what kind of disaster she'd walked into. Meanwhile, I frantically tried to salvage the pasta sauce by adding more pasta water, but I had forgotten to turn off the burner under the pasta, which was now rapidly boiling over. I was running around like a headless chicken, flipping the garlic bread, stirring the sauce, trying to keep the pasta from becoming one giant, sticky mass. And at this point, Sarah was just watching, wide-eyed and trying to suppress a laugh. It was a train wreck, but I was determined to power through. I finally managed to get everything on a plate and served it to her, hoping that despite the chaos, it would still taste halfway decent. We sat down at the table, and I watched as she took a bite of the pasta. Her face was carefully neutral, but I could tell she was trying not to gag. The sauce was way too thick and clumpy, the pasta was a little overcooked, and the garlic bread, well, it wasn't even really garlic bread anymore. It was more like charred toast with a hint of garlic. I was mortified. I didn't want to admit how bad it was, but Sarah was kind enough to smile and compliment the effort. Then came the moment I'll never forget. I went to take a bite of my own food, hoping it wasn't as awful as it looked. But as I was chewing, I felt something odd in my mouth. At first, I thought it was just a weird texture from the overcooked pasta, but then I realized there was something hard. I spat it out into my hand and found what I can only describe as a small shard of something metallic. My first thought was that it was a piece of broken glass from a jar or something, but I had no glass jars in the recipe. Then it hit me. I had, in a moment of desperation earlier, used a metal whisk to try to mix the eggs and cheese faster when they weren't blending properly. The whisk had slipped into the pot of pasta, and I hadn't noticed. I stared at the shard in horror, then looked up at Sarah, who was now staring at me with wide eyes. My heart sank as I realized what had just happened. Not only had I ruined the meal, but I had almost choked on a piece of metal. My face must have turned bright red because Sarah immediately asked, "Are you okay?" I could feel my embarrassment hitting new levels. I'm pretty sure I mumbled something about needing to take care of something in the kitchen and excuse myself. I hurriedly dumped the rest of the food into the trash, grabbed some Tums for the indigestion I was suddenly feeling, and tried to calm myself down. When I came back, Sarah was still sitting there, looking awkward but concerned. "Do you want me to order some takeout?" she asked gently. "We can pretend this didn't happen." And that's exactly what we did. We ordered pizza, laughed about the disaster of a dinner, and finished the night on a much lighter note. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had completely messed up. I ended up going to bed that night with the distinct knowledge that my cooking skills had sent me straight to the ER in a metaphorical sense. So, yeah, TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a home-cooked meal and almost choking on a metal shard. Safe to say I won't be cooking for her again anytime soon. TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend with a romantic dinner and almost burning down my apartment. So, a little backstory. My girlfriend and I have been together for almost a year, and she's a great cook. Like, one of those people who can throw random ingredients together and somehow make something delicious. Me, on the other hand, well, I'm the guy who burns toast, somehow manages to undercook ramen, and has set off the smoke alarm more times than I can count. But being in a relationship with someone who has this culinary superpower, I've always felt a little embarrassed about my lack of skills in the kitchen. I mean, how am I supposed to impress her when she can turn a can of tuna into a Michelin star-worthy meal? Anyway, last week, I decided I was going to change that. I was going to take charge and cook her the perfect romantic dinner to show her how much I appreciated her. I thought, hey, if I can't cook like her, I can at least set the mood with a nice meal. I had this grand vision in my head, soft candlelight, a perfectly set table, maybe even some mood music playing in the background. But most importantly, I was going to cook the meal myself. I was determined to pull it off. I knew I couldn't just go for any regular dinner, though. It had to be something fancy. After some quick Googling, I found a recipe for a homemade chicken Alfredo pasta that seemed relatively simple. No crazy ingredients, just chicken, pasta, cream, garlic, and cheese. How hard could it be, right? The day of the dinner, I was feeling pretty confident. I went to the store, bought everything I needed, and even grabbed a nice bottle of wine to pair with the meal. I was ready, or so I thought. I started by setting the scene in my apartment. I dimmed the lights, lit a bunch of candles, maybe too many, and put on some smooth jazz to add that romantic touch. I even put out some nice plates and silverware, thinking I was really killing it with the presentation. Then it was time to cook. I turned on the stove and began with the chicken. Now, I'm not entirely clueless in the kitchen. I knew I had to cook the chicken until it was golden and crispy on the outside, but juicy on the inside. Simple enough, right? Well, I managed to burn one side of the chicken before even flipping it over. But I didn't panic. I just tried to salvage it by cutting off the burnt parts and hoping for the best. I put the chicken aside and started on the pasta. Now, this is where things really started to go south. I'm not sure why, but the boiling water for the pasta never seemed to reach a full rolling boil. It was more like a slow simmer. I'm standing there, waiting for it to boil, getting frustrated, and then deciding to just throw the pasta in anyway. It quickly became a soggy, sticky mess that clung together in weird, unappetizing clumps. At this point, I'm starting to realize that I might be in over my head. But I wasn't going to give up. I was already committed. I grabbed the cream, garlic, and cheese to make the sauce. I followed the recipe, carefully adding each ingredient one by one, trying to create this rich, velvety sauce that would save the meal. But as I stirred, the sauce started to thicken and then curdle. I didn't know how to fix it. I added a bit more cream, thinking that would help, but it just got worse. Now I had this weird, lumpy mess that looked nothing like Alfredo sauce. By this point, I'm sweating, panicking, and wondering if I can still salvage this disaster. I've ruined the chicken, the pasta is a mess, and the sauce is basically inedible. My apartment is starting to smell like burnt food and cheese. I'm about to throw in the towel, but then I hear a knock at the door. It's my girlfriend. She's here. I quickly turned off the stove and opened the door, trying to act casual, but I could tell she knew something was off. She smiled at me, probably trying to be nice, and said, "Wow, it smells like dinner." She probably didn't want to say anything because she could tell I was stressed out, but I'm sure she could smell the burning oil and the heavy scent of garlic gone wrong. I led her to the dining table, trying to hide my panic. The table looked perfect, though. I had set everything up beautifully. The candles were flickering, the wine was chilling, and the jazz was playing softly in the background. But when she sat down and looked at the food, her face dropped. There was a long, awkward pause as she stared at the sad plate in front of her. She gingerly picked up her fork and poked at the pasta, then glanced at me, trying to be polite. "So, how was your day?" she asked, clearly trying to avoid commenting on the disastrous meal. I took a deep breath. "Listen, I'm really sorry. I tried so hard to cook for you, but I've messed it all up. I thought I could do this, but clearly I can't." She looked at me, laughed softly, and said, I don't even care about the food. I'm just happy to be here with you. Let's just order pizza." And so, we ended up ordering pizza. It wasn't the romantic dinner I had planned, but honestly, the evening turned out to be way better than I expected. We sat on the couch, ate pizza, and laughed at how ridiculous the whole situation was. I made a joke about how I was never going to cook again, and she agreed. Apparently, she liked the pizza more than whatever I was trying to serve. Looking back, I realized that the dinner didn't matter at all. It wasn't the food or the fancy setting that made the night special. It was the fact that we were together, having fun, and not taking ourselves too seriously. I still can't cook worth a damn, but at least now I know that the effort and thoughtfulness behind it all count more than the result. So yeah, TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend with a romantic dinner and almost burning down my apartment. But in the end, it was a night to remember. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.